Hello and welcome to the weekly wrap with the USA Liberalists. Tonight you guys just have me, and I think Nico will be joining us later. So we got a few different topics we're going to talk about. First up, we're going to talk a little bit about the Project Veritas videos and the bias that's been going on at Google. If you guys haven't heard about that, then why are you living under a rock? We're also going to talk about some more tech censorship. The subreddit The Donald has been quarantined. We'll go into a little bit about that. And then we're going to talk about the Democratic debates, and I can give you guys my opinion, and hopefully by then Nico will be here, or if somebody else wants to jump in, they can jump in too. So to start off, we're going to talk about the Google bias. And I'm not sure. I was watching Tim Pool's video on this, and he said that the video on YouTube has been taken down, but that the Vimeo video was still available. And then he said that it got taken down, but that it was available. And then I think he corrected it, and then it got taken down. So at the time of this broadcast, I don't know if it's still available or not. um, so hold on. But anyway, the video. Let me get my notes here, guys. Sorry for the pause, but when it's a one-man show and I was running a little late and things get a little mixed up sometimes, but just bear with me. All right, here we are. So basically, what this insider over at Google said is that they are essentially using machine learning in order to basically influence the search function. And they even displayed it in the video, which I don't have, but basically they're teaching it to select certain items as the truth, and so it's left up to the machine and whoever's programming it to make the decision on what the truth is. And so they're building their sort of bias into this machine, and then people don't actually know that that is what's going on. So an example of this is that when you do a Google search for CEO, the search won't produce a majority of male photos, even though the truth is that the majority of CEOs are male. Instead, it'll try to balance out the genders and show female and male, and then who knows, trans, I don't know, whatever whatever they want to show. But instead of producing the results that reflect reality, they produce the truth that these programmers want to be. And honestly, I think this is probably the peak for Google, is if this sort of stuff starts happening, the service won't work properly. Like, you can only fight the truth for so long. The truth is the truth, and you can only try to warp reality for so long before reality comes back to bite you in the butt. But they're gonna give it a good go for sure. So they have also in the video, if you hadn't seen it, they produced an internal document showing that Google made editorial choices It was basically a flow diagram. If you're familiar, it's like this step goes into that step. Uh, is this step complete? Yes or no? Then it goes, splits off in different paths and kind of tells you what's going on. All right. Sorry about that, guys. Still trying to get this all figured out here. Yeah, I just think that Google does have a bias, and I understand human beings, flawed as we are, we have biases. So we have these human beings programming these things, and they're not programming them to reflect reality or to be neutral, but they're programming them with an ideology in mind. I think this is going to push more people towards alternative search engines and the other products that Google offers, like Gmail and different browsers and stuff. I already know several people who have pretty much abandoned Google altogether. They don't use Chrome, they don't use Gmail, they use different email accounts. Ones that are more, um, I guess they're kind of like blockchain and all that stuff, which I'm not super familiar with, so I'm not going to pretend to tell you guys everything on the tech stuff going on. Um, Project Veritas video has been banned on YouTube. Tim Pool's video about it got taken down. And I believe he also did a video on Instagram or about the censorship over at Instagram where they censored pro-life groups and pretty much admitted that they censored them and they're proud of censoring them and then they took down Tim Pool's video pointing that out, which I think, well, that's a whole nother topic about what I think about that topic. I think the censorship stuff, though, ultimately is going to come back and bite these big tech companies in the butt. I think they're giving way too much credence to political activists to push a specific agenda. I think they're doing too much to moralize their mission as a business. Samson! And I think that by attempting to be moral arbiters instead of just providing a service to everybody, I think it's going to eventually come back and bite them. That doesn't mean that it's all going to be all sunshine and roses. It's going to be a long and brutal road until we get to that point. But I think we're going to see more of this sort of thing happening where these tech companies are going to try to censor people, specifically people on the right, conservatives, Republicans. And so like and subscribe, guys. Hopefully we'll stay here because half the people typically on the show are Republican. uh, that would be me. So I think going in 20, they're stepping it up. We've seen also recently that um, Twitter is going to, I guess, flag certain tweets from accounts no they can't delete, like President Donald Trump. If they deleted his account, that would probably not be a smart business move. But if he violates their terms of service, like why does he get a special pass? So instead of doing that, instead of deleting his account, they delete accounts like his, people who share his opinion, and they also are going to flag his accounts they said, to show people what you can't say. So they want to highlight what you can and can't say, which I agree, partially with the libertarian perspective on this, that these are private businesses and that they can run their business how they want, and if you don't like it, you can go somewhere else. But at this time, I don't think that's good enough. Um, Normally, I'm not for censorship or for government involvement in private business, but when these businesses essentially are the public square where people come together and talk and share ideas, essentially the internet has become an avenue for that. And we see more and more pressure, not just on these big tech companies like Facebook and Google, internet service providers, and we see pressure on credit card uh, companies too to withhold their services. And I don't think that you should be allowed to deny somebody's service. You should not be allowed to essentially expel somebody, to exile them, not allow them to have a credit card, not allow them to get a cell phone, not allow them to have their own websites or have their own YouTube channels. If they're open to everybody, they should be open to everybody. I do think that it's part of, for me, it's all part of a balance. That balance can't just be liberty for tech companies to violate your individual liberties. That, to me, is a form of tyranny. I don't want government to come in and take over because I think that would just lead to more tyranny. But I think rules that I do think that tech companies need to be accountable. Samson. Accountable for violating the liberties of individuals. Also, going back to the Project Veritas video, one of the emails that was produced from the Google employees called Jordan Peterson, Prager University, and Ben Shapiro Nazis, which is hilarious if you know who those guys are. I've known people who believe that these guys are Nazis, or at the very least that they are a gateway to the alt-right. So if you watch Jordan Peterson, then you're going to become an alt-right bigot and a racist, which I watch Jordan Peterson, I watch PragerU and Ben Shapiro, and I am not alt-right. I've always kind of been right-wing, and these guys, with the exception of maybe Jordan Peterson, are just run-of-the-mill right-wing conservatives. But I guess when you're as far left as Mao, a run-of-the-mill center-right or solid right conservative is alt-right. And that's part of the problem. Something I talk about a lot is pay attention to the words that people use, especially journalists. Journalists went to college. Most of them went to college specifically for journalism or English. And I have a degree in English, so I understand how important the words that you select in what you're writing are. And an example of this would be in a local story, they wrote, they threatened, they threatened violence to protect someone. And to me, there's a word for that. It's called they defended, or they offered to defend. But they chose those words very specifically, threaten violence to protect. And the reason I believed, and it actually turned out to be true, that they used those words specifically is because they wanted other publications to be able to quote them saying threaten violence as a quote as a way of smearing the person that they were talking about. And that actually did happen. There were articles that said, well, they threatened violence, and then that becomes the narrative that they're threatening violence. It actually got the state Capitol building shut down for a day. This narrative of somebody threatening violence. Now, it could be that the state police actually got a legitimate threat of violence, and that's why they recommended it be shut down. But they haven't released any statements. They haven't shown anything from Twitter or Facebook or emails. They haven't named names. They haven't named anything specific. And so, to me, I mean, it could be an ongoing investigation. This might come out later, but at the time of this broadcast, that just screams made up. That it was essentially a big game, and you can watch the game of telephone if you watch a news story long enough from the beginning to the end about how this publication will write the story and then another publication will write that story and quote it, but it'll be slightly more extreme or out of context, and then they'll write another story. Another publication will write another story pushing it a little further, and then this narrative eventually, when it makes its way up to like the failing New York Times, becomes militia groups invade Capitol and hold people hostage. No, not that bad. That didn't happen. But you can see how, you know, they write threatened violence to protect, and then they take threatened violence, quote it out of there, when they could have just used the word defend, but there was a very specific reason on why they used those words. So I always tell people, be careful with the words that you use. And I think alt-right has become that way in that it is such a nebulous term that it is essentially meaningless. Like nobody, alt-right has zero meaning because it's more or less just people on the right that I want to smear. If you ask somebody on the right what alt-right means, it means essentially racist, neo-Nazi, white ethno-state, those sort of people. But if you ask somebody on the left, they won't know. They'll say probably the same thing if they're center left. If they're a journalist, it's sort of like a nebulous phrase, and we've actually heard journalists, Tim Pool's actually interviewed journalists and has it on camera of journalists admitting to the fact that they know people aren't neo-Nazis, but they still use the term alt-right, and they defend their usage of the term by saying, well, it's just a nebulous term that means, people on the right. Which, if that doesn't freak you out, the state of journalism, I don't know what will. They also had, in the Project Veritas video, a staff member talking about manipulating U.S. elections to prevent another Trump election. So this is why I think we're going to see an increase in this sort of censorship going into the 2020 election. They did a little experiment in the video, if you haven't watched it, where they typed in Hillary Clinton's emails and nothing auto-populated the search function, so you had to type the whole thing in. And it was something that I didn't realize, but it was very subtle. If you go to, let's see if I can go to Google and see if it's still doing that. I'll just type it in here. Hillary Clinton. Yeah, you can see Hillary Clinton's nothing, and it doesn't even populate anything. You can still search for it. It'll still come up with, well, here's Judicial Watch, uh, or Wikipedia articles about it, or NPR, but it doesn't auto-populate. And I even spelled Hillary wrong, so, all different ways you try to do it, they'll kind of censor that sort of thing. Now, is that really censorship? Well, yes, because they're essentially taking away the auto population for that, and then they typed in Donald Trump's emails and it auto populated, even though there wasn't really anything about the emails. It came up with like Don Jr.'s emails about the Russia investigation and him meeting with the lawyer, the Russian lawyer lady. But it auto populated, so I think they're going to try to skew. They're not holding back these search results, though I do think they probably favor certain search results over others. But they prevent it from auto-populating. And while it's not a huge deal, it does make it that much more difficult. And if you think about it, most people more or less follow the path of least resistance. And so if the path of least resistance is to, search out things that when they auto-populate, what if, somebody like me, they forget how to spell Hillary or something, and they go, well, it's not auto-populating, so I think I'll just, it's too much work, I'll look it up later, and then they go off. That's a rare example, but it is something that could happen. And if you haven't, I would check out Tim Pool's video on tech censorship. I put it in the description below, so you guys want to check that out. It's down there. Tim does a great job. He has sources and contacts. Unlike me, I'm just some guy in his garage talking about this stuff. So he does a great job breaking it down and going into it more thoroughly. But we'll get into this Donald Trump subreddit being quarantined, the story I got pulled up here. I did have a question, and I'll ask, and if Nico gets here, I'll ask him, and we can talk about it a little more. But I think I'll ask the question, and then I'll give you guys my answer, or what I think. So the question is, will we see more of this censorship going on in the 2020 election? And is it an attempt to meddle with our election? I would say to the second one, yes, it's an attempt to meddle with our election. In the video, they specifically say we want to prevent another 2016 from happening. They don't want another Donald Trump to win. It's something that they got hammered on hard by the far left and the media, mainstream media, though I repeat myself, about after the 2016 election, is that